Hello, Robs. We're back with Cawdor by Robinson Jeffers, a 1928 narrative poem, which is reaching its climax. 14. It was true, and it was Cawdor that paid the suffering. The woman found ease in words and outcry. The man, the more sensitive by sex and by his nature, had forbidden himself action because one act was grown his cancer. Speech because speech betrays, even thought, in one regard, for if Hood's guilt were not monstrous, the punishment became monstrous. And if he had been solicited into adultery, his guilt was not monstrous, but halved and natural. There was evidence enough for that, and their thought was forbidden. Meanwhile, his mind remained implacably clear for the rest, cloudless, harsh light of what he had done, memory not dimmed with time, but magnified and more real, not masked with any mysticism that comes most often and stands between the criminal and his crime. A redeemer shifting the load onto fate, no failure toward unreason, except the fantasy of his wife's innocence. His loved canyon was grown hateful and terrible. He longed to go away, but that was cowardice. The set pride and code of his life prohibited that. He desired to kill himself, but that was cowardice. To go and accuse himself, but that was a kind of cowardice. All the outlets of action were locked and locked. But the most present desire and the most self-despise was to ask advice no matter of whom. Of George, of Dante Vitello, he yearned on them with his eyes, but that was cowardice and ridiculous too. Day by day, the tensions of his mind were screwed tighter in silence. He had some strength, though not the strength his vanity used to imagine, and now in the deadlock of his powers, endurance continued still. He felt the eyes of his house that used to peer at him from behind now openly glitter before his face. He believed they all knew, save little Michael, and were kept quiet by fear. They watched his face for weakness, as the blackbirds in Carmel Valley watch the green fruit for softness. After the flood in December, the later rains fell scant. Shrewd north wind, healing listless falls, blew the hills dry. Cawdor discovered his mind building conjectural bridges between the drought and the curse of his deed. He conquered the sick thought, another cowardice. In March, when the cows were calving, came printed news of foot and mouth disease among the cattle in the north. It had come in through San Francisco from Asia. An infected herd had been destroyed. Cawdor read and feared nothing. His herd in the isolation of the Coast Canyon would be the last. Yet he dreamed in the night that he was slaughtering his herd. A bench was dug to stand on in the steep wall of a gully. He stood there with the sledgehammer and Jesus Akana, all black, on a black horse against the twilight, drove in the cattle. One swing of the hammer for each on the peak between the horns. But the white-faced heifer sidled her head, and the blow crushed the horn. Bawling and slop with blood down the sleek shoulders, plunging among the carcasses. The dream returned too many times, the plague increasing in the north. He warned his men to guard the pasture and watch for strays. Then the dream ceased, but the hurt heifer still troubled his dreams. His mind had relented toward Farah, innocent sufferer and as wretched as himself. He saw now that both George and Michael hated her. Her arm had knitted crooked. It pained always in her pale eyes. He spoke to her kindly. She answered patiently. He saw, as in a vision, that if he should choose, he might go back to his own room from Hood's this very night, and all be as it was before. To hell with the glittering eyes. They would keep quiet. No, he said, and went out of the house. But she followed and overtook him under the cypresses in the evening twilight. Michael and George were left in the lamplight in the room, and Michael said, "I want you." She made more words, but they were too mumbled to understand. She stopped and drew breath and said, astonishing aloud, as if she were calling across the canyon, I want you to kill my eagle. I ought never to have kept it. Nothing but wretchedness. George, will you kill it quickly and without pain tomorrow morning? He stared at her and said, we've other troubles to think of. Yes, if you won't, I'll do it myself. I will. Don't cry, Michael. She went upstairs crying. In the twilight, under the trees, Farah touched Cawdor's arm and said timidly, the best would be not to have been born at all. But if we are bound to live, why should we hate each other? He turned in surprise. He had forgotten her. You are not bound. By failures of nature, I am like a sick beast, like Michael's eagle. I can't do for myself. I've tried. Think of me a little. You did the other, no evil, but eternal good. Forget him now. And if I can't end, failure's my peg, and I hang on. Mayn't we go back and live as we were before? You loved me once when I was a child, and you were a man. He stood silent, thinking of another matter. Suddenly, he barked with laughter and said, what am I now? A living God. You could answer prayer if you please. Don't be troubled, he said, about God. You talk about God the day before you go mad. I can't do that either. Are you afraid to live? She answered. Because they whisper, but they know nothing. They've not a thread of evidence. I've talked to them all. Not one, but I could betray you. She peered up at his face to see what it said in the twilight. It said nothing. He was thinking of another matter and walking the open way from the trees slowly toward the sea's fading light. Besides, they are all afraid of you. Oh, listen, she said. We two alone have all the decision. Nobody but I can twitch the reins in your hands. Look at me. She caught his arm. Am I changed? He looked and suddenly laughed with pleasure. Why? Like a blown-out candle. Perfectly changed. The fragrance all gone. All the wind fallen. He failed to see the lightning pallor. He was so prisoned in the surprise of his mind. No more in my eyes than a dead stick. No more, he said in astonishment. Then Concha-rosis. He spoke with no intention of cruelty. His mind, in the pain of its own bonds, islanded alone, incapable of feeling another's. She clasped her throat with her hand and said, shuddering, for this? No, not another time. I went on my knees to Hood. I made myself a shameless beggar. I washed his feet with tears. That's not done twice. To love me, and he would not. Ah, God, how I can make you know it. Ah, God, how can I make you know it? I duped you too well. Ah, dupe. Ah, fool, she stammered. Ah, murderer. Machine that one winds up and it goes and does it. I wound you. I was the one. Now the air's fire to drink. And the days and nights the teeth and throat of a dog. Shall I hide your eyes with my hand always from what you have done to let you die in sweet ignorance? He said, go on, strain it out, gasping the heifer with the first calf. It's the only child I'll bear you. I hope you will like the child. You killed the other. Woman's, but mine perhaps will spill you from the same rock. For proofs, asked Michael. She heard me pray to him for love. Asked Concha-rosis again. The fat beast listened and saw. She heard me. She helped me fool you. Asked Jesus Akana. Watched me lead Hood from my father's earth to the laurel to be my lover. I led him. I called him. I flung flowers and fire at his feet. He never at mine, and he refused me. He died for that. Ask your eyes, heartless blue stones in their caves. Wanted to be blind, and they saw. They saw me come down in the rain to call him. The rain steamed where it struck. I was hot. I walked in a shameless burning heat. My father was dying, but I ran down, and again you saw me. Hood was naked in bed at dawn. You caught me in his room. Had he received me gladly or kindly? Had he raised his arms to receive me? I begged, and he put me by. I broke in to beg, and he was driving me out when you came. He remembered his father's honor. He was a fool and faithful. He's paid for it. He was faithful to you. You paid the wages. Ah, wait, I've more. It's precious to me to tell you these things. I've hardly desired honey-sweet death a long while. You lie too much, he answered. I asked you before to tell me. Pour it out. He stood like a gray tree in the twilight, only a surface trembling. The axe was blunted in the bark. Farah thought, and she said, I asked him to cut leaves from the laurel to lay in my father's grave. There are no flowers in this ditch, and under the laurel I gave him my love. Are you glad that he had my love? That saves you. That lets you live, the old husband happy in his wife's pleasures. Under the laurel it was, behind the concealing oaks. Under the laurel it was. Before I had only cried out and begged with tears, but there I gave him my body, my arms about him, my breast against him. Be patient, will you? This is not much. This is not the poison. I gave him my flesh to eat, as Michael takes up meat to the eagle, but he was wilder than the eagle. He remembered his father's honor. He would not feed. My arms were his cage. I held the meat to his mouth. He would not feed. Her face distorted itself and seemed to reflect flame, like the white smoke of a hidden fire of green wood shining at night, twisting as it rises. Gypsies crouched by the smoke's root, watching strange flesh simmer in the pot between the forked sticks. When the wind varies, their eyes prickle, and the shine of the smoke hides the gray stars. Her face writhed like the shining smoke, and she cried and said, I wish the little rivers under the laughing kingfishers in every canyon were fire, and the ocean fire in my heart not afraid to go down. I broke my heart against his mouth like honeycomb. He would not take me. Oh, the bitter honey, the black-blooded drops from the wax. No wonder he refused me. There was a lion skin I wore to my death. Was it you stole it or Concha? He gave it to me, his one gift, but your house is a house of thieves. One boy was honest, and so you killed him. The boy respected his father's possession. He despised me. He spat me out. Then when I pressed him hard and set fire to his body, the heart and soul I never could reach, they were both stones. He took his hunter's knife in his hand. He made the pain of the point in his flesh a servant against me. Into his thigh he drove it. He laughed and was lame and triumphed and limped into the darkness of death. She stood silent, and Cawdor remembered his son's lameness, stumbling under the old man's coffin up the steep hill. He groaned aloud, then Farah's face gleaming spotted the darkness before his eyes. I loved him, she said. Love is a trap that takes the trapper and his game in the same teeth. The first to die has the luck. They hang bleeding together, but you were a mere dupe and a common murderer. Not love, but envy. Dupe and fool, what will you do? He swayed against the dark hill. You make the lies, he said hoarsely. Must I always believe them? Time, all my damnation drawn from having done in a haste. What do you want? If I were you and had your strength, I'd kill the woman first, then cut out the eyes that couldn't tell my innocent boy's head from a calf's to butcher, and smell my way to the rock and take the jump. I asked you, he said, because a known devil's word is a warning. She came and touched him. The first's easiest, she said, to kill the woman. The rest follows of its own accord. She stroked his face and said, it is all easy. He took her throat in his hands. She did not tremble nor flinch. He tightened his fingers slowly, as if he were dreaming the thing, not doing it. Then her mouth opened, but the ivory face kept its composure still. His fingers closed a little harder and half checked the hot breath. Suddenly she clawed at his hands with hers. She cried, have pity. I didn't mean it. Oh, I was lying. Let me live. He set her by and ran back to the house. She heard him sob as he ran. George was alone in the lamp-lit room. Cawdor came in and said, it's nothing, and went upstairs, his eyes so sunken that no gleam showed. He shut himself in the room he used now, where Hood had slept before. George followed quietly and saw the crack under the door silent of light. He listened and heard no sound. Then he returned downstairs. Farah had come in. She made him smile and passed him and went to her place. And that's all for that one. How many chapters are left? Just there's 2 more. All right, Pops, that's all for now. Goodbye.